All right, Myco Wizards of the World, we have successfully made over 50 videos, let's say, in a marathon like no other. And this is our second YouTube release from the archive. What we have today for you, in basically its original form, maybe a little bit refined, is our How to Design a Lab episode, which is the second episode ever that we filmed. Tyler and I sat in the back of the old Cap and Stem location and just went through all the ins and outs of airflow and HEPA filter placement and corridors and you name it. So if you're trying to design your lab today, check out this video. And if you like it, head on over to myco-wizards.com and check out all the other content that we've got. Take a look right here.
Fucking done short side.
Good evening, everyone.
I'm Tyler Crawford.
I'm Eric Lohman.
Welcome to the Myco Wizards Deep Dive.
Episode 2.
Two? We're on number 2. What's the title of this episode? What are we going to talk about today?
When you say lab, Tyler says clean room.
Clean room!
So we're going to talk about
Clean
clean
room.
rooms, how to design a lab, how to design a knock room. What are the fundamental principles? How do you go about laying out the facility? What do you have to keep in mind?
How many clean rooms have you ever built?
1.
How many clean rooms have you ever worked in?
2.
2. Wow. Jesus.
But
3. You got spawn, you got our substrate. The substrate's kind of a clean room.
Yeah.
like
Well,
dirty,
and
dirty
Spawn's
clean.
like a million rooms.
And then Alex is one shady spot
1 room.
with his giant 5-foot tall HEPA filter.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize. They do not sponsor this. All right. Well, that makes sense.
I drank
You got a little
before we
experience.
went to work.
I drank during work.
Alex is a HEPA filter. Funny story there, where the second he got it all in place and had that whole lab design,
Yeah.
his cat got into the lab and saw this giant HEPA filter and thought it was one of those scratch board things that cats use. And so the cat
no, it
just
kind of looks like those.
sees the cat just like hanging on the HEPA filter, just tearing it apart. Oh fuck!
Oh, that fucking sucks, man. Was that while you were there?
No, that was
Oh, that's brutal.
2005 or something when he got
Wow.
whatever year 2010, whatever year
Yeah.
he built that farm.
I think Charlie needs some of the sacrament. Yeah. All right. I'm just. Gonna...
Yeah, you've seen the light.
Oh.
He needs disinfection for all of his corruption,
Right.
amorality.
Hail Satan.
Okay, so
All right. So first off, what's the most important component to when I say clean room? You say
lab. The most important thing that it just has to be a super clean room. You know, the actual definition of a clean room.
this is a
is
super clean room.
it's just a room where the air is filtered to be as much as possible free of particulates in the air and that it's just disinfected and cleaned all the time. It's as simple as that, and then it gets more specified depending on what kind of industry you're in. So there's clean rooms in hospitals, there's clean rooms in research laboratories, there's clean rooms in, computer part manufacturing, and all this kind of stuff.
And it's just different levels of filtration, measuring particles in microns.
Yeah, and there's different degrees of strictness depending on
dog is really unhappy.
How critical your work really is. So someone designing parts for an airplane,
right?
If they fuck up, it's a much bigger deal than if we have a contaminated bag spawn.
Yeah,
the plane crashes. So that's where these concepts get incredibly strict.
A plane crashes here if a bag of fucking spawn gets through.
Yeah, well, by the sound of some of our customers freaking out, it's existential.
It's existential at best. Okay, so when we're talking about like cleaning rooms, we're talking about not only like chemically disinfecting rooms and keeping them minimal, as we'll talk about later, but the most important version of this is positive pressure. Say it with us now.
Positive pressure.
Positive pressure. Or overpressure if you eat a lot of mayonnaise and you're from Belgium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, we're going to get into the weeds with all this, and that's going to be the bulk of this episode, because that really sets the foundation for designing a room like this in the proper fashion, or a facility like this in the proper fashion. Sure. So we talked about this in the first episode, but just to kind of briefly recap, when we talk about positive pressure, we're just talking about inside a room, the air pressure in that room is greater than the air pressure outside. Baseline atmospheric pressure. Reason why that's important is that clean air from this room is always pushing its way out rather than dirty air coming in.
Hopefully pushing its way out where you want it to push.
Exactly. And we'll get into how to design the room to accomplish that.
All right, one moment while I take care of my stupid fucking pit bull. I didn't call you a stupid fucking pit bull. I love you. Ow, get over here. Okay, we're good. We're good.
So, if we'll get into how, if you're just designing for one room to inoculate blocks, inoculate spawn, and it's as simple as that, then you can get a lot less nuanced. When you're designing a multi-room facility, you have to get pretty careful about how you set pressure levels and design airflow throughout a facility. But one thing to know is there are units of measure for relative air pressure. The most common one used is called Pascal, from the guy who, whoever Pascal was.
Didn't he cure rabies?
Rabies is still here.
Shit. Found a cure for preventative
vaccination.
Vaccine. Okay, yeah. I was gonna say you don't really prevent rabies.
That guy was awesome.
I don't know if it's the same Pascal. It could be Pascal versus Pascal.
Okay. Anyways,
we digress.
The standard unit of measure for air pressure is Pascal. PSI is still used, obviously, in a lot of contexts, especially when it comes to sterilization and pasteurization. But in terms of low levels of air pressure, typically Pascal is used. You can look up that. And
you can use your notes. Don't be shy.
I got them right here.
they're just out of sight. Rectangular sheets of snow are okay.
Pull them out.
Bring it out. Bring it out. Let's give these people what they want.
All right, so you're going to want to be able to measure in some fashion or another if you have positive pressure, and perhaps how much. If you're just designing one room, it's as simple as going towards the spots where it's leaking out, or the spot where you've designed the room to be blowing air out, feeling for a strong rush of air.
Right. That's by definition what you're after.
Right. That's the fundamental thing. When you're getting into multi-room facilities, even as simple as a cool down and a knock room, if you have those divided, you're going to want to make sure that these are pretty well calibrated. For that purpose, One instrument that is possible to purchase online pretty easily is called a manometer, which it's a pretty simple handheld electronic device where you can basically feed in 2 tubes, one into one room, one into another room, and then it's just going to measure the relative air pressure differential from one room to the next. And
how does this work? It's it's one of those cool, it's like almost like a light bulb, but it basically has a meter.
Yeah, there's like digital ones now that are just like a little handheld monitor. That's like what we have in the lab.
It's like
it's old school ones like that for sure.
So you have 80 or 5 Pascal. What's Pascal? PA?
PAS. Oh yeah, PA.
It's PA.
Yeah, PA. Yeah.
Right, so that's basically measuring like the resistance between the 2 rooms.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just the differential air pressure.
Gotcha.
This is all right. So, anyways,
shit I didn't know.
There you go. So, circling back again with a clean room, what you're trying to attain is basically you're trying to create like the moon on Earth. It's just dead of all life. As long as it has air for you to breathe, that's kind of the ideal standard. You want nothing living.
This is also how you hire for clean rooms. You go, do you like the moon? Do you like dead planets?
Do you want to go to outer space?
Do you listen to Dead Moon?
Dead Moon Night.
This is a great band.
All right, so that's the fundamental goal. That's attained through designing the right having the right design with HEPA filtration, with the right materials, which we'll get into, in orienting these in the proper fashion. So just as we talked about with fruiting rooms, when you're trying to positively pressurize a room, you need a plenum to pull from. That can be as simple, just as we talked about, as the larger building that this particular lab or room is in, or it can be a dedicated room that's acting as a plenum. Whatever it is, that room needs to be conditioned to the temperatures that you want your clean room to be at. So if we're talking about just a knock room, you want to make sure it's comfortable for working in there because you're hustling and bustling and shaking bags. If it's an incubation space, then of course you want to make sure that that plenum is feeding in air at the proper ambient temp that you want your mycelium to be growing at.
I'm going to give a brief drawing because drawings are fun. Laminar flow. Laminar flow is a relative term here, but you're basically taking a temp-controlled, dirtied air environment as your plenum, and you're pulling it through a fan into the back of a HEPA filter and out into a lab.
Right. And then from there, of course, that positive pressured air has to go somewhere. And if you're lazy about it, it can just leak out of every which mishappen, piece of chloroplast in your room or piece of wood in your room. If you're doing it right, you want to direct that air in a strict fashion.
Hopefully for the purpose of temperature control, which is most important in labs and in facilities in general, to recirculate back to the original origin of the temperature control.
Yes, exactly. We'll get into this in detail, but temp control in positive pressure environments is a little bit more difficult than in a lot of other contexts in a mushroom farm. Because by definition, it's always pushing out air. So you're putting a lot more stress on your HVAC, so you do want to have like a whole principle of conservation. Of course, the same logic applies if this was an incubation space rather than an inoculation space. You'd want to make sure that you have a independent evac for CO2. As far as the placement of this stuff, so the typical standard in clean rooms is that HEPA filters, your inbound sterile air, is going to be placed in the farthest possible distance diagonally from where your air is exiting from. So in a typical clean room, you'd have, if you have your HEPA filter up here, or ideally in this corner right here, your exit would be somewhere over here. The reason for that is just like with a laminar flow workstation, even though it's not important that you have pure laminar flow throughout an entire room, you do want to ensure that the air is moving in a steady current and not causing turbulence inside the room. The more turbulence there is, any organic matter and thereby contaminants that are lurking in the room will have a chance to kick up and mess up your grow, mess up your workstation, etc.
One of the good ways to actually work through this concept is to, I'm going to kick your ass, Edna. She just wants the ball under the table. I'm going to take you and put you somewhere where there's lots of cookies and puppies, and you'll be very happy.
I don't fucking want to.
But before I take Edna somewhere, you calm your yodeling, singing the sounds of your people. This is where a hallway can come in great sort of like benefit. Because if you actually have positive pressurized air coming through a filter and come into a hallway and black, back out. Outbound air. Okay. Let's do this a little bit differently. This sort of speaks for like how we design our lab a bit. But let's just call this kind of what it is. So, general description, right? Fan pulls from the plenum, goes through the room, finds its current, exits. Got a nice long hallway here. The skinny hallway is also how you deal with pressure drops. But then it would go back out to the plenum, only to be brought back in.
Idea being here that you're creating just a circular air current that's very straight without any of the preconditions to cause a bunch of turbulence inside any of these spaces. As far as how the room's designed, because you have to remember that anytime you're moving through, you're causing turbulence the whole way. So if you're starting from a baseline where the room itself and its airflow plan is very linear, then you're setting yourself up for success and going to have a very clean space.
Yeah, a huge example of like things to not do in a room is, say you were like, oh man, this AC went down. Let's just throw a AC that recirculates inside of this room. This is something we have to kind of argue with people all the time about. Is the fact that you're recirculating air. When you recirculate air inside of a room, you have a collection of coils on the back of an AC. On the back of an AC, I got some weird beer accent going there. Jeez, I'm crow. So somebody's coming in and out of this room, and say they're a scum fuck that forgot to like change their booties, or they ripped a bunch of weed joints on lunch.
Their beard's just hanging out.
Beard just like fucking. This is terrible. It's like Aaron Gonsalves' beard. I can say her name. I just like pointing Aaron out so that maybe he watches this one day and goes, "Oh, you mentioned my name, you dick." Anyways. The great Gonsalves is missed. So you're going in and out of this room, you're dirty, air is being recirculated through this, which means on the inside of this unit, you're basically collecting any fragments, like what Tyler's talking about. And then you're dispersing those fragments that are collected from the vector, human, gloveless, beardless.
Open air, and over time, that's going to get dirtier and dirtier.
Right. So the solution, take this stupid thing, fix your AC, and keep your airway moving just like that.
Yeah, any temp control should be done outside of the HEPA filtered space. That's what it comes down to.
You know, there's all sorts of like ways to get around this stuff for a period of time. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about a clean room or a, how do you call it?
A lab?
A lab? Oh, jeez. You want to prevent contamination, and I think that contamination will flourish eventually. I've seen recirculating fans in cool down rooms. I've seen all these other like weird things, but eventually,
there's always a grace period when someone sets up their space for incubating spawn and blocks. But what happens is microbial buildup.
Right.
If the room's not designed right, that rate at which microbes are building up and calling your room a home will be a lot steeper than if you design the room the right way.
Calling your room a home. All right, I'm into this.
All right, so we went over having a plenum. We went over how when you're setting up the room to get a linear airflow in that room and minimize turbulence leading to contamination, you want your inbound air through those HEPA filters to be as far away from wherever that air is leaving the room as possible. Typically, again, that's diagonally, where you have your HEPA filters either very up high on your wall or on the ceiling itself. That's also typical. And then you have your exit for the air down low in the opposite corner of the whole space.
A minimized version of this is like the HEPA filter cabinet, right? So there's multiple types of cabinets, but essentially it's a work surface that goes back a certain degree, and your HEPA is either hiding in here or it's hiding up here.
Yeah.
And if it's hiding up here, it means this is graded and the air goes through the table. If it's this way, it basically bounces off whoever's working. Hopefully it doesn't deflect back in.
Yep, exactly. And I think at a future date, we'll get into like aseptic technique and how to work properly in the context of laminar flow. It's worth pointing out there that if you have vertical HEPA filtration, the actual movements you need to do when you're making plates or what have you, those movements are very different than in what is more typical a horizontal laminar flow. That's what most people are used to.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing to just mention briefly, again, this is the kind of thing that matters a lot more if you're designing a multi-room facility. If you're just designing a knock room, you can honestly get by pretty fine if you just know that, oh yeah, I feel a ton of air coming out of that room. It's definitely positively pressured.
Right.
But if you want to actually calculate the air exchange rate in that room, pretty simple standard concept in HVAC and in clean rooms. You just want to divide the CFMs coming out of your fans from those HEPA units by the volume of that room. So measuring the length, width, and height. And from there, you can deduce how many air exchanges you're getting per hour or per minute, what have you.
So if we have a 4 by 4 by 4, you're saying a cubic room.
Mm-hmm.
So that means this volume equals what?
Boy,
4 times 4 times 4.
64.
164. So 4 times 4, 16.
16 times 4. 64.
Oh my God, he was right. So say you had 800 CFMs in there, divided by 64 equals.
Oh God.
Oh.
I don't know.
All right. Wait, this is how you're determining what though?
Your air exchange rate out of the room.
Holy shit. So if you actually divide this, you have 12.5 air exchanges per minute.
Per minute in this case.
Holy shit. So that's how many air exchanges you have. This also applies to it's a super easy thing, but a lot of people don't really get that it's easy to apply to fruit room design as well. So if you have a 12 by 24 by 10 foot room and you divide it by the number of inputs, you can see how fast an air room will turn over.
Right.
Because essentially a lab or a clean room is the same as a fruit room, except that you're trying to prevent backflow of CO2 and spores in a fruit room.
Right.
And you're trying to proliferate just filtration and linear airflow inside of the lab room. factoid.
Yep. Exactly.
So that calculation is
Yeah.
really nice.
Yes, like a lot of this can apply to a lot of different contexts in designing your farm. All right, so now let's get into multi-room facility and how you want to design airflow and positive pressure differentials.
True that.
So, the fundamental thing you want to keep in mind.
Huh.
What's going on there?
Technical error. You know what's really cool these days is you just get an app on your phone and you go, "Hey man, we really want some light, man," and then you just turn it back on.
All right. So,
you got
So we'll get into like a multi-room airflow plan.
Okay.
This is important to ensure the continuation of good process and all those rooms meeting the standards that you want. You need a good airflow plan, and you need to actually keep track of it. So the fundamental principle to keep in mind here is you want the rooms that are of the utmost importance to be at the highest air pressure levels, and you want them to subsequently drop down room by room in rooms that are progressively less important. Typically, the way that manifests is the rooms that are the most important are being directly fed by HEPA filters. Those rooms are actively overpressured. And then from there, that air goes out of that room into rooms that are passively overpressured from all of those rooms. And one thing you want to keep in mind is you want a pretty good gradient of higher air pressure in that more important room versus that next room. You want that to be pretty steep. The reason is the second you open up a door to get in that room, all that pressure just starts to drop quickly, unless you have that room at some insane level of overpressure where you have to be just pushing that door closed, which is totally unnecessary and a massive waste of energy. The second you open up that door, that air pressure is dropping real fast.
That's true.
So you want to give yourself a buffer, basically. And the typical rule of thumb is you want 20 pascals from room to room as a minimum, or more. More is just going to give you a bigger buffer. And again, like this is something you can measure. If you had these instruments to measure air pressure, the second you open up a door, you'll be astonished at how quickly that air pressure just drops back down to baseline. So yeah, most important rooms, the highest air pressure, and then they move passively throughout the rest of the facility, in and out. And here you're getting a sneak peek of what may or may not be Maine Cap N Stem Spawn Laboratory.
It's totally not. It's totally different, actually. I mean, all these things are going to look like pretty similar to some degree,
So
right?
you see a series of rectangles. These rectangles are rooms. These are doors. And yeah, so to put it in context with our lab, the rooms that we consider the most important, in order of importance, are what we call the flow hood room. That's where our flow hood is. That's where our cryogenic freezer is. That's where we do all of the most delicate work to preserve and continue the genetics that all of you farms rely upon. That room's at a very high level of pressure.
It's mildly condescending.
And next up would be the cool down room. We have a room where its only purpose is just a big empty room that we keep insanely clean and pretty positively pressured. That's just where when we take out our grain bags after they've been autoclaved, they cool down in there overnight. Independent room from the inoculation room. In our context, that's important because we have runs going in the autoclave all the time, all day long, at the same time that we have people inside the inoculation room knocking up bags under supervision.
Sweating bullets and fucking don't
Got my
sweat your
one-way
spawn.
mirror.
You got your one-way mirror.
And So, of course, you don't want those people to be hot as hell, sweating bullets when those bags are coming out of the autoclave at whatever degree, 250, 150, whatever. If you're in a context where you're just doing one run a day, you could pretty easily get away with just cooling down your bags of spawn, your blocks of substrate in the same room that you knock in.
Right,
so that depends on context.
Yeah. I mean, it's from a simple standpoint, and this isn't very this isn't exactly how we're set up really, but here you have like 3 major rooms that get positive pressurized air from HEPA filters, and HEPA filters is the last thing in the room. Everything else is preconditioned. Airflow goes linear from each of these rooms, coming from the plenum to the hallway, which doesn't have a HEPA filter. It's just lower in pressure because all these things feed into it, and then they go through the path of least resistance. So what's interesting about a lot of laboratories that you'll see, including ours, is you'll see a door sort of way, let's say this is a wall. Here's the little fucking doorway right there. That thing opens up that way. We'll have these little things called dog doors. And essentially, you can put pieces of coroplast or different plastic to allow X amount of air to escape, to sort of play with the pressure inside of each room. So in here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here are little dog doors. Those things basically allow you to control and regulate the pressure, as well as controlling the rheostats for the fans. So you have 2 versions of control. You have
Exactly.
the fan flow,
You have your CFMs and you have your outbound. And
yeah.
This can get as fancy as people have crazy computer systems where this stuff's all automated.
Yeah.
What we do is we just have these holes cut in the wall, and like Erik said, we just have pieces of coroplast that we can just move them up, move them down, and thereby encourage more air out of that room or less.
Give me like a really quick reason why you'd want to increase or decrease the airflow in a room that has nothing to do with sterility per se.
Right. So temp control, that's one thing. So if you're having a hard time maintaining warm enough temps, for example, in a room, if you can restrict the air exchange rate out of that room, you can start to slowly build up higher ambient temps. For example, if you're in an incubation setting where you're incubating in a clean room, of course, all of that mycelium's producing heat as it grows. And you can harness that by just restricting the airflow out of that room by making that overpressure exit smaller. Conversely, if it's too hot, lift it up, crank that air out of the space.
I should say it's not hotter or colder necessarily, but let's say this is how do we put this? This is kind of hard to explain, but like, let's say you're heating a space and your predominant issue is that it's cold outside. It's fucking Maine in the winter. You're heating this space, you're pulling it through the HEPA filters, but this is outside. So if you decrease your fan speed, this will help. But simultaneously, if you can't do that with risking your pascals or your pressure dropping, you just restrict the amount of air that's actually leaving that space. So the heat, as it goes into this building, kind of builds up a little bit higher of a pressure before it actually exits. Whereas if you were like, oh man, it's getting too hot in this space, it would go through number 2, which would be a bigger space.
Yeah.
So, say it's super hot outside and you want to cool in here. It's the same metrics. Cool versus independently controlling how big the space is that you're actually exiting.
Yeah, you're just giving more time for that conditioned air to stay in that room.
Yeah, because if it goes too fast, this heat is just gonna blast the fuck into here and just fuck that up.
Yeah.
Why is that important in spawn?
Well, let's see. So the obvious thing would be incubation. So all of our spawn is incubated inside the laboratory. It's not in outside dirty air. So in that context, of course, we need good temp control to have healthy growth. And also have the incubation growth rates that we're looking for, so we keep things on a schedule. In the context of just people working in there, you want them to be comfortable, of course. So you want to ensure that you can keep that at some kind of semblance of room temp. Especially in like our context, people are wearing Tyvek suits, and those just trap in all the heat coming out of your body. So your temp inside a Tyvek suit is, I don't know what, something like 10 degrees higher than whatever the ambient temp is in that room.
This guy has a massive head, but I figure maybe we didn't really intend on talking about it, but it'd be kind of important to bring up something here, and that's, what are people wearing inside of these rooms for something of utter sterility?
Right. So, an important maxim to keep in mind, and this is especially the case when you're talking about sterilized substrate or spawn, is humans are the biggest contaminant in the mushroom industry. This is still important when you're pasteurizing, but once you're sterilizing, you're in that high risk, high reward situation where sterilization renders something completely dead of all organisms that could have been in there, even bacterial endospores, but it's far more easily contaminated. So with that in mind, if the need is that great that you really want to ensure that you're absolutely minimizing the chance of contamination of anything you do, PPE is where it's at. So in our lab, it's full body. So everyone who works inside our lab is wearing a full body Tyvek suit. They got a hood on that Tyvek suit. Tyvek is non-woven. It's basically has the same permeability as a HEPA filter. It's down to 0.3 microns, I think.
And if you make it too hot for these motherfuckers,
and that's why it gets hot, because nothing gets out of that, Yeah. And they're wearing face masks. If you wanted to be super thorough, just like with COVID, you'd wear a N95, but it's a bit overkill.
This is really funny. Everybody probably knows what PPE is.
I know, right? This stuff would have been so esoteric. Yeah. I'm like, what the fuck
is PPE? Not one person doesn't know what the fuck that is.
Wearing gloves, wearing booties. The booty part is important. Like, I recommend having dedicated lab shoes.
Crocs, man.
Wear Crocs. They're easy because you can clean them.
They're good for your back, despite what your mom says.
And they can be personalized.
Yeah, it's true.
Eric has some camo Crocs, for example.
Oh, yeah, gotta be white trash, right?
And, your feet, like in a lot of labs, people will have a foot bath, even. It's just, like, your feet are going to track in more shit than anything else on your body,
There's a great
presumably.
word that I didn't know until I didn't even know this is how you fucking spell it. How do you spell sluice?
Sluice? Yeah, you got it right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh man, I went to school.
Yeah. So, all right. So, in that little drawing that Eric made of a whole facility, let's do that again.
Yeah. Oh, the whole fucking thing.
It's just something.
Okay,
Draw some
we'll do the
rectangles.
cutoff. So we'll kind of have like the hallway in here.
Yeah.
Doorway, and then we have like, let's say this right here.
Middle boxes of sunshine.
Yeah, man.
All right, so a sluice, people will call it a pass-through, an entry room, an exit room, antechamber. Those are essentially the rooms that either you or items are moving into the clean room facility or out. They're sort of acting as an airlock in a sense. They're providing the final buffer between the baseline, unpressurized, super dirty, contaminant-ridden air on the outside and your wonderful, clean, godly air on the inside.
Really?
So in a typical context, these are also one way. Ideally, people are entering the room, the whole facility, through these entry rooms, these sluices.
Oh shit, I should turn.
Yeah, in our context, that first room is the room at which someone strips down any outer layers, their hat, their shoes, sweaters, jackets. They move into the next room. That's where we have all of our PPE. And they'll put on their Tyvek suit, Crocs, booties, gloves, mask, all that jazz. And then they move into the facility. So you're, again, minimizing anything that could be a contaminant from getting into that space that you really want super clean. You know, your clothes are a contaminant. So if you take them off in this room that's sort of half clean, half dirty, you're already cutting down a lot of the risk. In a similar fashion, there are typically sluices, exit chambers for everything that's leaving the facility. So
once you go back that exit sluice, let's say this is the opposite and this is the exit sluice. Once you go into here, you don't go back into there.
Right. So one-way movement in general. Yeah, so that's a good point. Is ideally you structure your work when you're inside a clean room facility, so you're moving from the tasks of most importance that you really need to keep clean progressively down towards less clean things. So, for example, if you're trying to just do a knock inside a clean room, and you also need to mix, if you can make it work, it's preferable to knock first, mix second, because you're going to be covered in shit, sawdust, and what have you. So it just makes sense. And in a similar fashion, your actual product, your grain spawn bags, your substrate blocks move from cleanest rooms all the way down until they go out of the facility. Right. And as I was talking about before, an exit sluice is just where anything that needs to leave the facility, whether it's mycelium, whether it's just equipment that you need to get out of there, yep, whether it's racks, all that stuff gets pushed out into that room. That again acts as sort of a buffer between dirty air outside and overpressurized room on the inside.
I think it's worth taking a moment to explain the difference between clean rooms and their correspondence between sterilization and pasteurization. Because there's also this version of a clean room, or a what you say, how you call it?
Mayonnaise?
Oh, there you go. Where and this is like a very brief example, but you have this ultra complicated procedure for going into something if you have sterilized a product.
Right.
Versus if you're working in a lab, these are identical labs, no different, but you've ultra, as a lot of you people are familiar with, pasteurized something.
Right.
There's a moment where the material that can go from wherever the chamber is to be ultra pasteurized into the lab can pass through a dirty zone. Right. And that's sort of an interesting concept, and why a lot of people get into ultra pasteurization, which we'll go into in a different time. But basically, that's anything that's under 1 psi. So boiling point at sea level, 212 Fahrenheit. In Celsius, who gives a fuck? If you sterilize anything to any degree, and what's the definition of sterilization?
Sterilization requires getting to a threshold of 250 Fahrenheit, 15 psi, as long as those are correlated. And in the process of that, you kill everything except for prions that are in your bags.
How long does that take typically?
So there's a concept called bioburden. So different types of materials are going to have a different load of microbes, and they'll need to be sterilized for different lengths of time. A rule of thumb in the mushroom industry, because what we're working with has a super high bioburden, it's loaded with mold and bacteria.
All of the endospores.
Is 35 minutes. There's a lot of misconceptions about this. I think we'll get into this in great detail when we talk about this stuff in its own episode, but
the whole
a lot of people think that, the more sterilization the better,
or the stupidity of the shroomery carrying on and saying
very specific recommendations of
2 hours.
It needs to be 90 minutes
or 90 minutes.
It's not true. like, truth be told, 35 minutes is even higher than what's typically described when people talk about bioburden. Usually it's a threshold between, I want to say, 3 and 15 minutes. Something we've been, thinking about. But 35 minutes is what a lot of...
That's not the chamber temperature. That's the internal temperature.
Exactly.
That's the medium.
Yeah, that's the primary variable there is... the chamber can be whatever temp it is, but there's always going to be a gradient between that chamber and what you got inside.
Yeah.
And
quick digression. I don't want to take a gazillion fucking hours on that, but I figured.
But I think what you're getting at there, though, is
how important
with a pasteurized growing medium, it has a little bit more resilience to contamination initially.
Yeah.
When you sterilize something, again, everything's dead in there. It's super clean. But it can get contaminated like that.
It's like Mars for Elon Musk.
So that's why typically you'll see in a situation where someone's actually autoclaving and sterilizing something, the double door autoclave, typically that second door is going to be in a clean room setting, so that the second that stuff's done cooking, it's in that clean space without a bunch of particles in the air and potential contaminants.
We call that a pass through, like with umlauts, and like it's a drive through.
Pass through?
You ever notice that? You go through drive through? When the fuck is it ever spelled through? It's always THRU.
Broke my brain. Yeah, that's a good call.
It's fucked up. Fucking English. Anyways, moving on.
All right.
Did we explain positive pressure 7 ways to Sunday?
I think we kind of did.
If you don't get it, you're fucking gonna get it eventually.
Email Erik if you don't understand.
It's spawn@capnstem.com.
Okay.
It's Erik, by the way.
Damn it.
That backfired like some bitch.
Oh, yeah, turn that vacation reminder on. I'm on vacation until 2023. All right. So yeah, I think we talked about positive pressure enough. Now we can talk about construction. So,
what's some materials we want to
once
use?
again, it's kind of the same as a fruiting room. You want it to be super inorganic, easy to clean, type of materials that microbes aren't going to want to reside on. So, Coroplast, 3M, steel studs, all that stuff for the win once again. Worth mentioning too that this stuff's pretty cost effective and it's really easy to put up. We learned that lesson. We used alternate materials early on, wasted so much time, money, and effort.
Yeah.
Building out a space before, like, why don't we just go with what's straightforward?
One of the things that I think people often forget is that your farm, no matter how you're going to build it out, is going to move. Mm-hmm. This room that's here is now going to be over here in 6 fucking months. I don't care what anybody says.
Oh, yeah.
You just outgrow shit like crazy.
Yep.
This is a massively growing industry. But if you don't have your, burrito money dialed into this channel, then clearly you're going to fuck up more. So you're going to have to buy more steel studs, flash and tape, or Coroplast.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can set up your space where it's as modular as possible, you're going to thank yourself later, because you're going to want to expand a room. You're going to realize that one room is totally redundant or it was set up the wrong way.
Yeah.
And again, Coroplast, it's totally waterproof. You can clean the heck out of it really easily. So that would be our recommendation.
It will melt and
That's
kill
worth
you,
mentioning. Got to be ready to jump out like the Kool-Aid man.
Yeah, but maybe I shouldn't say this.
Or is it just it's your time?
I mean, it could be. No, I was going to say Canada, is the nanny state to which half of your people roam and or hail from.
Yeah.
Or both? Just half.
Just one. Yeah.
It's only half fruit cake. They basically don't say you can't use Coroplast as a building material. It's not structural, but if that shit caught on fire, it'll fucking boogeyman.
It'll melt all over.
Yeah.
So that is worth mentioning. If it catches on fire, just get the heck out of that room, because it's very easily flammable.
And you'll be like, I'm melting.
Yeah.
What other fucking weird ass materials?
The
floor is.
Yeah, the floor. That's really key.
No fucking apostrophe drains.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't even write that down. Yeah. So, yeah, just like in a fruiting environment, any floor drains are just gonna become a vector where molds and bacteria, and particularly bacteria, are just gonna thrive and build up over time. So even though you're mopping these clean rooms every day and all that jazz, any drainage needs to be out of the clean room altogether.
Yeah.
No drains, no faucets as well. All that stuff has to be out.
There's also so much fucking airflow going through a clean room or a lab that like it's just gonna dry.
Yeah,
really
it dries
fucking
real
fast.
fucking fast. Yeah. And then here epoxy. So you want to treat those floors because number one, you want them to be clean. You want to trap any potential contaminating material or toxic material that are already in your concrete to begin with.
Mold does grow in concrete.
Yeah, and you just want that surface to again be super inorganic, super easy to clean, and super easy to keep clean over time.
Yep.
And easy to move around on as well. So epoxy's nice for that.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's pretty simple as far as construction. And that
there's also like a million YouTube channels that everybody should look at about how to create like structure with steel studs.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because you don't even you just need like a pair of tin snips and you can like create these rigid tabs and shit. And this stuff is stronger than fucking plywood to some degree, and it's a hell of a lot easier to deal with later because you have self-tapping screws.
Yep.
So you can do a lot of the same fashion sort of like building where these steel studs are essentially you can cut these little tabs.
Yeah,
plow
you can
them in from each side.
However you want. I mean, you framed up mounts for pretty heavy HEPA units with these.
Yeah, those units
hanging
are
on
like
the wall.
50 fucking pounds or something.
Yeah.
So if you single up and create some studs underneath, just YouTube University that shit, because steel studs are really, they seem flimsy, but like if you sure them up and you create these little tab cutouts and stuff, they're so fucking strong. It's unreal.
Right.
Which kind of blows my mind. Yeah.
All right. I think now let's chat about like the actual like workstation.
Sure.
What you're doing in that room. So again, like the most common application for having a clean room in the first place is going to be for inoculations. So you need a workstation.
Are we going to call a workstation essentially like the table with the flow hood, no matter if it's a cabinet or not? Because there's a difference. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
First thing to go over though is, and this is a common mistake. There's a difference between recirculating HEPA filtration for your knock table versus actual positive pressure. Again, like if you're going to positive pressure that room or that HEPA unit has to be fed from the outside. A lot of people are thinking they're positively pressurizing a room just because they have a bunch of HEPA fans blowing, but all they're doing is recirculating the air in that room. They're not actually building up pressure. So you're going to want both. You want a wall-mounted unit that's positively pressurizing, and then you have your workstation, and you want that HEPA filtered. The more the merrier, whatever's right-sized for however many people are involved with your knock process. If it's just one, then you can get away with less HEPA, linear feet of HEPA. If you got a whole crew in there, then you got to build out a whole wall. And the same logic applies. You want to have variable speed control, ideally, on those HEPA fans, so you can adjust how fast, the CFM rate coming out of those fans.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is just a quick breakdown of kind of filters are sandwiched between almost a rubber gasketing. Then you have a table, and then you have an air gap in the fan with a dispersion plate in front of the fan. And the dispersion plate is nothing more than a piece of metal with some holes drilled in it.
Yep.
And it just breaks up the air so that it evenly distributes rapidly across that air gap, which is in the sealed box through the filter to create laminar fucking flow.
Yeah, and what would happen if there wasn't that plate there is all that air would just be directed through the center of that HEPA unit, and you could tell, you could feel this, let alone measure it. There would be far slower fan speeds coming out of the sides of these HEPA units rather than through the center, and what you ideally want is completely equal laminar flow coming out of every little nook and cranny of that HEPA. You want it to be all the exact same.
If you have it coming out at indiscriminate sort of directions, you have, you know, once again, you're creating these little currents, which might not seem like a big deal on a table, but when you're trying to put, you know, as many objects as close to the filter as possible for inoculation, you want to make certain that, you know, even the air over here, which you can fix with like a 3D sneeze guard, it's not pulling in air from somewhere else to recirculate.
Yeah, exactly. You just by doing your inoculation are already creating all the turbulence needed, and you don't need any coming from the HEPAs themselves.
So that's too complicated for the description of how to workflow. So let's just say this is the table, flow hood, filter, table.
Right. Okay. So there's a specified range of CFMs that would be called laminar flow. Technically, that's 0.45 meters per second. Once you get too low, then it's really easy for turbulence. Too high, and you get above that. You can measure that with a fancy device called an anemometer. The reason mayonnaise meter.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The reason I bring that up is over time, your HEPAs are slowly going to break down. You can extend their longevity by how well you treat them. But over time, their performance is going to start to wane. You know, if you take perfect care of it, you know, you can have a HEPA unit running seamlessly for about a decade. But if you don't, you can quickly, within a year, have that HEPA unit start to not push out equal amounts of laminar flow throughout, and you can have some spots that are creating turbulence. And again, with turbulence, you have the opportunity for any air outside of this workstation to make its way in and into your blocks.
Yep. There are certain units, I will say, like our cabinet it's got a fan underneath this actual thing, so airflow comes this way and sucks back down to the bottom of the table where the fan is, and then back up the flow hood. Mm-hmm. So it creates this little recirculation pattern, but it also has, you know, guards.
It's got guards, and it's even got a blowback, so it's got separate fans that blow out.
Yeah.
This way, the idea being that as you move your hand in or what have you, it's pushing everything out as you go in.
Yeah, for sure.
But
the basic one that most people are going to start with, and like, let's just assume you're knocking up some fucking blocks, kid, on this table.
Yeah, so it's really a simple idea. You just want to ensure that you have as much or greater linear feet of HEPA filtration for where you're working when those bags aren't sealed. As soon as they're sealed, at that point, it's not that important that they're in front of laminar flow because they're protected, because they're sealed. So you need to make sure that that's right-sized. A lot of people try to get away with having some sort of brief gap between HEPA filtration, between their spot where they're actually spawning and the spot where they're sealing. Again, the kind of thing where you can get away with it to some extent, but it's going to bite you in the ass eventually. And another facet that's important to keep in mind is you want to make sure that all of those blocks that you're putting on the table are actually getting laminar flow. The thing about it is, of course, the fan is going to be pushing out air through the HEPA filter initially at perfect laminar flow, if it's set up right. But the farther away it goes from that fan, that speed's going to drop, and eventually it'll become turbulent. So ideally, you want everything you're working with, from your blocks, your bag of spawn, your isopropyl alcohol bottle, your hands, to be as close to the flow hood or the HEPA filter as possible. so that everything's in laminar flow the whole time.
So one of the things to resist doing that a lot of people are like, oh man, this is how we knock up 1 million bags at once.
Bag. Yep.
Bag. Don't do that.
Yep.
There's ways around this, like workflow processes, multiple people in a room, longer flow hoods. You want to keep things that you're opening essentially sandwiched right up to the flow hood. And imagine these as 10-pound blocks of substrate. Then you have your bag of, spawn media and maybe your little alcohol bottle.
Yep, exactly. One little note here too with how you set this all up and how you think about your process is the edges are of course the most vulnerable spot. Mm-hmm. So if you have your spawn bag on the edge, you want to give some distance. People will tell you different amounts, 4 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches. The moral of the story is you want a little bit of a barrier, a gap between where that spawn bag ends and where that HEPA filtration ends. Because of course you don't want to contaminate that spawn bag or all of your work was a complete waste of time. One thing you can do if you really don't trust yourself is you can just try to size it so that actual work table surface area is sized just to go 1 row deep. This is something we did right off the bat, and it's honestly nothing to do with trust. It's human nature to find the path of least resistance. And so you're doing this monotonous task over and over and over again. Once you get into the groove and you're not thinking about it, you're naturally going to try to find ways to speed it along, and hence the tendency to start stacking blocks. So if you just size the table so it's just not big enough to even do that, then you never have to worry about it.
Yeah. I see a lot of these, they're like all like psychedelic growers for the most part. Not all of them, but they'll stack a gazillion vertically and horizontally bags in a cabinet, which is really fascinating for me because I'm like, I don't think these blocks out here are getting fucking airflow.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people will try to cool down their stuff in front of laminar flow, and they're actually desiccating it the whole time. Drying it out.
And the common misconception here is that let's take our cool down room, for instance. We have this cool down room with some filters, and this is the pass-through autoclave. So dirty shit comes in this way, gets sterilized, mutilated, macerated. Not really, keeps its form. Vacuum pressed. And then it gets pulled out of here on racks. The bags are just basically folded over on these racks, and positive pressure is coming in here. What's different about this in this application is that gruddy ass fucking hands and gloves are coming in here and opening shit up. A little bit of beard follicle, a little bit of fucking, I don't know, human excrement from taking a shit when smoking your butt, kid. It's gonna end up in there somehow. And that movement of air and the human component really does create a vector. And in this situation, it doesn't. This is just sterile air being passed through linearly in a room. Whereas this, you're actively spraying things with alcohol, you're cleaning things, there's just a higher chance of issue.
It's amazing. We've played around with our anemometer and tested fan speeds, to make sure our HEPAs are still up to snuff. We do this routinely, but it's amazing to see how much CFMs you produce just by moving.
And these anemometers are just fucking fans.
It's just a
face with a little digital readout. Beep, boop,
yep.
Beep, beep, beep.
And you can measure it in feet per minute or a wide variety
put it up to your flow hood.
Wide variety of fans.
I don't think they're that expensive either.
Nope. They're used all kinds of places. I forget how much ours was, but it was cheap. Let's see, what else is there to say with an inoculation room? You want HEPA filtration all the way until the bags are sealed. In terms of what we just talked about with the fact that your movements are creating the most turbulence in this environment, one small detail that I think is often overlooked is the shaking should take place as far away as possible within reason from this laminar flow. So
specifically with spawn and sterile media.
Yeah, exactly. If you can have just a little bit of clearance, so you know that when you're shaking those bags, you're not just forcing in dirty air into that table, then that's going to help you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of people who like, you know, go the other route. And if you're like single-handedly doing this, like I know Amy from Fox Farm does this. Like she'll basically like fold the bag, pinch it up, shake it.
Give it a little pre-shake.
Yeah, and then basically feed it through her flow hood. So, you know, since you're not, she's kind of like covering over the bag and so on and so forth, you can get away with it. But like we keep saying here, scale is everything. And if you're getting away with it now, eventually you won't get away with it anymore. And you'll be really confused why.
Yep, scale and time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, another example of like this particular situation is we had a farm that we reached out to that we were trying to figure out, or they reached out to us, trying to figure out why they had contamination in their lab. And they were actually incubating racks in their lab. And, you know, maybe they'd have 1 or 2 bags contaminate and they would take it out, so on and so forth. Well, every time you have a bag contaminate and you have people moving back and forth in this room, you're essentially just pulling contaminants and just whipping them against your table. So we'll get into this a little later at the end of this, but, you know, there's a degree of simplicity that really has to be taken into consideration when you're operating in a room. A room should have one function in the lab. It shouldn't be stacked.
I think it's kind of the right time to talk about that. Is like,
you want to talk about that now?
Minimalism.
Simplicity thorough.
Minimalism. So you know, like if you were to walk into Cap and Stem's lab as one example, you know, despite the fact that we crank out, you know, a lot of spawn on a weekly basis, you'd probably be pretty amazed to see how
like nothing is going on.
Those rooms are so empty except for what's actually necessary in those rooms. And that's good because that's less stuff to have to clean. That's less variables to worry about in terms of keeping that sterile environment.
Yeah.
You know, so in a room where you're cooling down, all you need is HEPA filters and a clean floor. In a room where you're...
And no floor drains.
And no floor drains, for sure. In a room where you're knocking bags, you just need your HEPA filtered workstation and your sealer. That's it. In a room where... Thank you.
Oh, he's an alcoholic.
In a room where you're incubating, you just need racks with spawn on them. You know, like, you know, there's minor exceptions of little tools and instruments that you use, you know, but even that stuff, you know, in our context, all of that storage of various utensils for the lab and, you know, these different tools we have for monitoring some of these environmental variables. All that stuff we keep in the hallway.
I think one thing that I see a lot of times, and people, you know, if you're in your fucking garage and you have 2 rooms, like obviously you have to like condense a little bit. And I'm sure everybody's seen a picture of fucking Mushroom Mountain Tradcotter's lab, which is like stacks of fucking shit everywhere.
Right.
They don't mass produce spawn.
Right.
And they don't mass produce spawn in that area whatsoever.
Yeah.
So our aim in this podcast aim in general is to just like reiterate redundancy of simplicity to very acutely produce something that is going to be consistent. Yeah. And that's the name of the game for making money and not fucking losing.
Yeah. You know, and even though a lot of these examples we're talking about this, you know, big facility that we're operating out of and stuff, you know, that same logic will apply. Like if you're just knocking up, you know, 20 bags a week at home, the same stuff applies. You want that space where you're knocking to be as radically simple as possible. And you're going to thank yourself because it's going to be a lot easier to have consistent success.
You're going to thank you, Tyler. I mean, Eric. Shit! Fucker. All right. Sorry, I mean to scream in your face like a melodramatic.
That's okay. So yeah, minimalism. Talked about linear airflow with positive pressure.
Yeah.
Talked about materials. One last thing I think that's a good topic to get into is cleaning and disinfectants. So,
how often do you guys actually clean the lab?
Oh God.
And I mean not like mop the fucking thing, but I mean like wipe the walls.
Yeah. So in our context, again, because with scale comes greater risk. After every like session, some type of work in there, if someone's making slants or knocking bags of grain, or selecting orders, after any of those sessions, we'll do a thorough but pretty straightforward clean of, vacuuming and mopping. Once a week, every single room gets completely disinfected from head to toe. Ceiling, everything except for the equipment involved.
What do you
Sidebar for that, don't saturate your HEPAs with liquid. We probably should have mentioned this earlier, but
it's important.
the actual HEPA filter, not talking about the fans behind it or pre-filters or anything. HEPA filter is just a really complicated matrix of paper. That's all it is. And
Be kind to your filters.
if you're spraying off your spawn bag, go like this. If this is your bag and in front of me is the filter, don't point it right at it. It's one of these little things that'll build up.
This is like a great example though, like the COVID tests. Everybody has taken these, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put this dirty thing up your nose and you force it through liquid. When liquid travels up a clean filter patch, it's pulling contaminants.
Exactly.
If your fucking filter is soaking wet from alcohol because you're just lazily spraying goddamn fucking isopropyl with a goddamn spray bottle, you're just soaking your filter and pulling contaminants through the filter.
Yeah, and it doesn't even matter that it'll dry off really quickly because it's blowing out air. You're still giving an opportunity for some type of contaminant to plant itself in there. And then your HEPA filter turns from the thing that's preventing from contamination from happening to the thing that's causing it.
Spraying Agent Orange on the fields of Vietnam.
In that regard, too, if inevitably you're going to spill grain in there, you're going to spill sawdust, I suppose, stuff like that. Vacuum them out. 'Cause that's another thing, too. If there's a little millet seed that's trapped in your HEPA filter, obviously that thing's packed full of nutrients that mold loves. And it will also turn into a source for contamination. But where were we?
Well, I was just going to go say, like, we have... What's funny is I didn't really realize the predominant difference between, like, in the States, we just, like, fucking bleach everything or use isopropyl alcohol. 70%, motherfucker. But in... maybe you can tell us a bit about what they use in Belgium.
Okay. Yeah. So... you can use a wide variety of disinfectants. You're just going for something that has high efficacy and preferably not at a concentration that it's going to hurt you.
I don't know if that's how you spell that shit.
It's quaternary ammonium salts.
Quaternary ammonium salts.
Yeah,
so ammonia.
Yeah, ammonia disinfectants are an option. Bleach is a great option. Isopropyl alcohol.
The cool part I thought that was about the fucking having quats is that I think it literally just says quats. It lasts a lot longer, so it doesn't you can have a rag and a bucket all day and you basically just like clean surfaces with it. That keeps the spraying to a minimum. You're not fucking isopropyling everything.
There's an evaporation rate that's a lot slower. And, I don't know the specifics on the chemistry, but in terms of it breaking down, it stays active for a really long time. Yeah,
for sure.
So out there in Europe, they'll just have these buckets and they're just always at the ready and they're always still chemically active to do disinfecting. Whereas, something like isopropyl has a pretty short half-life. I don't know what it is exactly, but it only works for kind of surface disinfection for brief periods of time, and it's not the most thorough thing to totally kill.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people just think that 90% isopropyl alcohol just evaporates really fast, which isn't necessarily true.
Right.
And I think that, like, 70% has become this meme. It's the meme of the hour, said Terrence McKenna. But it truthfully is like the major sacrament of the mushroom farms in America. I don't think many mushroom farms in like the, anywhere else use it.
Not as much.
It's not as available.
No, I remember out in Belgium, it was pretty funny how there were like little culture wars there between people who were like, I'm a Quats guy.
No.
Oh, yeah.
There were Quats wars?
No, yeah, Quats. Quats
fucking
I
way.
use isopropyl. I use vodka.
The guys from Brazil were like, we just use nothing.
We use white roe.
We use white roe. We sprinkle water all over.
No,
our
like a
potatoes.
typical standard is you're going to use something that's a little bit more intensive and a little bit more of a biocide for actually cleaning your room at large. You know, so typically we're talking about bleach there.
Right.
You can talk about ammonium salts. Don't mix them.
Don't mix
That's
them.
how you create mustard gas and fall asleep in the bathroom.
Mark did that once.
That's right.
Oh man, that was wild. I don't feel so good. I was like,
You made fucking mustard gas.
So you can live. Well, you can live.
He can live.
Yeah.
We shouldn't. We don't know.
Yeah, maybe he's.
might not.
He's dead. No, Mark's not
I
dead.
don't think he's dead. He didn't die
Mark's
then,
still
at
got a
least.
landlord. Anyways, hope you're well, Mark. Goodbye.
Yeah, don't mix them. Those are two examples of some pretty beefy disinfectants. Of course, bleach is going to be the commonly used one. Yeah, don't need a lot. Don't do the old dump. I don't remember, but
if you're treating water for a fruit room, you're like at 150 to 200 parts per million. So like you really don't need to go over that for cleaning and disinfecting for bleach in particular.
yeah.
So let's just assume you're not going to go over 400 parts per million.
Right. I
Just
do know
read the fucking thing on the back.
once you get to 20%,
Yeah.
I believe is the number, is where your bleach water solution turns from a cleaning solution to actual biocide, which means it has some kind of effect at killing cells of anything that it encounters, including you.
Humans.
So don't be too cavalier about it.
I worked at this farm in Arizona. We had like super pharmaceutical grade bleach to like clean shit out, and he didn't know he had to dilute it.
Yeah.
And he fucking just was like, ah! And he cranked the dad, and he's a super hippie motherfucker. And I was like, he just ran away crying. I was like, the fucking dude didn't add water to the guy.
Oh God! Oh, that's terrible.
Just like he was cleaning his hands in it, and I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, you don't want it to like
Don't do
your
that.
room to reek of bleach. It's just one like rule of thumb, you know. Like
Right.
you shouldn't be able to smell it that easily, you know.
No.
It's probably too much if you can.
Yeah, if you really, it's like chlorine in that sense, you know, and chlorinated bleach is a similar thing. You can smell chlorine in a water. There's actually not enough, but if it's bleach, you're using too much.
Yeah.
So,
Then, you know, a fundamental idea to keep in mind, like why you want to clean on a daily basis after you do work inside a clean room is, again, what you're trying to fight is microbial buildup. It's still going to happen to some extent. There's literally no place on planet Earth that is completely free of microbes, as far as I know.
space.
Okay. But, you know, again, you're the biggest contaminant possible.
Just go into space.
Bye, Jesus.
Oh, glitter Jesus. What the fuck?
So, you know, after you do your work, you've already, to some extent or another, you know, provided some type of inroad for some mold to build up or some bacteria to build up.
Yeah.
No matter how good your process is. So by cleaning the whole space afterwards, you're just slowing that process down ultimately.
Yeah.
And again, if you're in a situation where you really want to maintain really high standards, then consider complete disinfection of your clean room at some type of frequency. You know, some people will do once a week like us. Some people will do once a month. It kind of depends on scale and how much you want to prioritize having the lowest possible contamination rate.
Yeah, I hear so often like farms say, oh, you know, my contamination isn't that bad. It's like 5%. And you're like, 5% is a fucking profit margin. Like, I don't, like, if we lost 5% of every spawn bag or spawn batch that we ran,
right,
we wouldn't be fucking producing spawn.
There's a lot of that,
So-
the margin that we're actually making goes out the door there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
it's
mean, that's an important thing to
enormous.
think about in ag in general. No matter what your station is, whether you're a fruiting farm, you're a spawn lab, or anything in between,
Yeah.
your margins are slim, so you got to do anything you can to to protect them.
This shit isn't like, this is hard science, and it's not like rocket science. It's
exactly. Yeah. Hopefully it didn't get too verbose, because really we're just talking about creating a clean environment through filtration, through the right materials that make up that room, and through the right orientation of your equipment.
It's interesting. We never hired anybody into the Spawn Lab in particular who like was like an anti-masker type.
Oh, sure.
They were like, oh, we don't really have to wear Tyvek suits in there, do we?
Yeah. The closest we came to it was the landlord.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's senile.
The old senile man.
He just kept reappearing in our lab. And
so,
I was like, dude, no.
Yeah, what happened is this guy wears a lot of cologne, and you can smell him from like 400 feet away.
This is what you do when you're 80. You smell like you're dying. Your gums are
rich.
rotting. You're fucking trying to cover it up with fucking mouthwash.
You just look like a big cigarette.
Yeah. No, he's a pretty good looking guy. He's got some cigarette boats. Anyways.
And he was stumbling into the lab, and then you managed to stop him.
Yeah. You can smell the waft of cologne going through that exit sluice.
I guess, one thing to keep in mind is, like, just speaking from my own experiences, if you have this room that's really important, and you're a super busy farmer, and you got a million things to do and a million places to be, there's going to be moments of temptation to kind of slack on some of these things. You got to be pretty disciplined about it, because it's like the, give an inch, take a mile rule, where if you give any kind of leeway where like, oh, don't worry about completely suiting up, you just got to grab your phone that you left in there, then these things turn into habits, and same thing goes with disinfection. Same thing goes with that little example of keeping your HEPA filters alive and well, and cleaning them of any grain that gets in there. That's a hell of a lot easier to do. It takes 2 seconds after you knock. You got a couple grains in there.
Just use a vacuum.
You don't want to cause deformations in the HEPA filter itself. But just stay on this stuff, and then it'll be a lot easier.
There's lab people, we should say. Like, we hired a lab person. Somebody who came from a working lab. You don't have to hire like Joe Schmo to fuck it up. And it's really kind of interesting to know that like that is like, I like the differentiation between Spawn and Substrate in terms of like the crews. They're very different people.
Oh, very different.
They're different types of like personalities and the attention.
No, it's like worth pointing out that you want the right headspace for doing a really monotonous task. And doing it at the right pace, because the thing about it is, if you're in the farming world and how to hustle,
careful,
you're gonna try to like get through this knock as fast as you possibly can.
It's true.
And that matters, obviously. Having this to be an efficient process is important, but you have to balance that aspect of things with having the right technique, so that super awesome hustle that you have isn't all for naught because you contaminated a bunch of shit. So there's always kind of this dynamic tension between the two, and you just have to make the judgment call about where on that gradient do you place, the happy medium in your context. And
I feel like we're going to give passive business information all the time, but like, it's true. Like you pointed out earlier, that everybody has a bright idea, and like, it's not that their bright idea isn't an intelligent idea. It's just that they haven't done it and seen what happens because of it. So, everybody will hire somebody who eventually like stacks rows of bags, and they're like, dude, we got done in fucking half the time. And you're like, half the time doesn't really matter if it's half contaminated.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So it's about educating like your employees or your partners or whatever in this sort of circumstance as to why and how, and that sort of proliferates this sort of careful consideration for details. That's important in this industry.
And like, stuff specific to this topic, like the right technique, I'm pretty sure that we're going to get into that like in greater depth and have nice visuals and stuff. But like, have the right mindset. If you're just a solo person hustling and doing this all yourself, just try to compartmentalize different aspects of your psychology, so that when you're going in to do a knock, you're going in with the right focus and the right pace, knowing that you're going to minimize your chance of failure,
Taoism, baby.
Yeah, and if you're hiring someone, hire someone who has a cool, steady demeanor.
Yeah, it's true. Like, they look like they might smoke a lot of weed, but they probably don't.
They're just like reading books and keeping on top of their brother's taxes because their brother doesn't do that.
And if they're too into Thoreau, just tell them that,
that's not how the world works.
Yeah, it's not. Thoreau's mom and sister used to bring him cookies at Walden while he's writing civil disobedience and shit.
Yeah.
Fucking dumb shit. No, I love Thoreau. Don't get me wrong.
Well, to quote the great Damon Hicks, stop bitching. Let's start a revolution.
That was the greatest ending line ever. I mean, is there anything else to add? That's pretty much, that's a sterile line.
Positive pressure.
Oh, right.
And also positive pressure. Construction.
Yeah.
Yep, we did it.
Holy shit. And we added stuff to it.
Yeah, we talked about all kinds of things.
This has been great, Eric.
Yeah.
High five.
Nice to see you, Tyler.
Good to see you too. Fuck you! Just kidding. We love you. Until next time.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Jesus.
What did you think of that episode? It's kind of rad to go through an entire setup and look at a video that Tyler and I made single-handedly, I don't know, however many years ago. 2 years ago? 3 years ago? Maybe a year ago. I don't even know. What is even time? If you like that, head on over to myco-wizards.com. We've got a brand new episode that just dropped today, the same day that this was released, the 21st of June, 2024, on everything mushroom, bag, and filter related. So if you're wondering about XLS-A, XLS-B, XLS-T, 3B, 15A, whatever the fuck. There's so many different types of bags, from Sacco 2 to John Donahue's defunct bags to Unicorn to all the Chinese and, Japanese ones out there. We talk about it all. And if you got questions, hopefully we answer it. So head on over, myco-wizards.com. We'll see you there.